Why do they never go in for me?
Hey music lovers, I'm back again, and it's another in my series of British Indie and Me. Now this one is all about a group of bands I've been meaning to make a video about for the last 2 years, possibly. It's a group of bands that are responsible for my original channel name, which was Grebo69, and there are a bunch of bands that I really do still love, and I think they're all really great. I've just listened to a load of their records again, and they're still good. So the genre that I'm going to talk about is Grebo. Now this was a short-lived kind of music press instigated scene in one way. If you look up Grebo now on the internet, you'll see there's a lot of retroactive redefinition of what Grebo was. But back in 1987, it only really included a handful of bands. I mean, we're talking four main bands that were labelled as Grebo. During 87, there were another load of bands started turning the guitars up, but weren't really Grebo. And then sort of around 88, 89, 90, there was this kind of a second wave, and they weren't known as Grebo to start with, but they've kind of been retroactively relabeled as Grebo. They were more just a bunch of indie bands, mainly from the Midlands, but more on them in another video. So, original Grebo. Originally, Grebo meant anybody who had long hair, wore a lot of denim and leather, into bikes, and listened to Motorhead, Status Quo. Especially apparently in the Midlands around the 70s and during the early 80s. That's what Grebo meant. If you're a Grebo, you're into bikes, grease, and metal or hard rock. The first record that could be labelled Grebo was this one. So this is a reissue of 2 7-inches that Pop Will Eat Itself put out in 1986, I think it was. First 7-inch EP they released was Poppies Say Grrr, and the second one was Poppycock, and this is called, the reissue is called Poppycock. The Poppies play 5-a-side. So the music was real frenetic, sub 2 minute punky pop songs, really inspired by the Buzzcocks. They were 2 minute thrashers, every single one of them. What I loved about the early Poppy stuff, and all the way through their career really, was they had their tongue firmly in their cheeks all the way through, and they kind of had a self-deprecating humour about them. They didn't give a flying one what anybody else thought of them. So we've got, on here you've got songs like Sick Little Girl, There's a Psychopath in My Soup. But the main song that this is really kind of influential in the scene was the third track on side A, which is Oh Grebo, I Think I Love You. So this was the first song and the song that gave the scene its name. Seized on by, I think, Melody Maker. Mick Mercer wrote an early, quite scathing article about this bunch of bands from the East Midlands and others who were turned up the guitars, playing a kind of more rock music, so listening to, playing Born To Be Wild, playing, listening to Zeppelin, maybe sort of that kind of stuff. But this was the first one, released on chapter 22. Can I get the label out? Oh, it's very, just, there we go. Pop Will Eat Itself label. So they followed this up over the next year or so with a couple of other EPs, of which I've got the 7-inch versions. And they were, the first one was Sweet Sweet Pie, which is more of the same buzzcocky thrash, B-side, Devil Inside and Run Around. Great indie track. Again with the logo, the old first logo they had. And they followed that up with a covers EP, and I've only got the 7-inch, I didn't get the 12-inch. I think I've got, they're now collected, all these songs are collected on Now for a Feast, that album, which I think I've got a CD copy of somewhere. But then they released a cover of Love Missile F-111, the song by Zig Zig Sputnik, which I actually absolutely played to death during the 80s. For about a year and a half I was infatuated with it. And you can see the rock side of it coming out there with a cover of Hawkwind's All Gone Accumulator. This is more of another thrashy cover, although they do have a breakdown where they name check their own, every single song I think they'd released up to that point in a kind of rap style-y. So they were the first Grebo band. Then a few others arrived on the scene, enough for the music press to start jumping on it, but it didn't really, it kind of fizzled out before it got anywhere. So the Poppies were from Stourbridge, which is in the West Midlands. Now another couple of bands were from the East Midlands, and they were kind of playing the same sort of pre-grungy sort of rock, different styles of rock. So in Leicester, in the East Midlands, there were two bands that came through. So the first one is this lot, Crazy Head, and this is their first single, What Gives You the Idea That You're So Amazing Baby, which is a brilliant thrash of a song. The point about these bands, especially the Poppies, they hadn't gone in for their like hip-hop pineapple hairstyle shenanigans at that point. They were basically dressed in black leather, black jeans, long hair, looked completely different to the way they did barely a couple of years later. So this lot, you can see, black leather jackets, long hair, playing a kind of, now Crazy Head playing a kind of more garage influenced guitar, pop, rock, influenced by Captain Beefheart, especially on some of the lyrics, which are a bit hat stand, to be honest. Better idea of what they look like. There we go. But this is what I used to look like. I'm basically a black biker jacket, black jeans, maybe paisley shirts, something like that, stripy shirts, long hair. So I kind of, even without realising what I was doing, I'd ate the look of this. So, terrific stuff. They followed that up with their second single, Baby Turpentine. They were actually signed to Food when they were actually still a indie label before they were taken over by EMI. Another great single, 4 tracks on here. Got a great cover of Bang Bang on here, which was the first version I think I'd actually heard of this, including the magnificent Pork Beast on bass, absolute monster. So that's that one. So the second. Strange Fruit also put out a load of session EPs. So this was a session that I picked up off the evening show on Radio 1. 4 more tracks, Baby Turpentine, Down, which is a great song, out of Lynn, Dragon City. Really good stuff. Oh, I didn't show any of the... So let's get the label out. I'm not going to show all the labels. I mean, this is just a stock original Food label. There we go. So that's the label on that one. So yeah, Crazy Head was, at one point they seemed to be poised to actually make it. So they released a couple more singles, Rags and what else was there? Rags and Time Has Taken Its Toll on You. And then they got first album out, which was released in, I think, 88. Not the first Grebo album. I'll show that in a minute, I know you'll see why in a minute. So this is more of the same, slightly better production, well, more polished production, let's put it. I prefer the sound of the 12-inch singles, to be honest. It's a rougher, more garagey sound, but this was a good album, good debut album. You could tell they were trying to make a bit more of a successful themselves, and I think this was released after EMI actually took Food over. Yeah, got copyright EMI Records with Parlophone on it as well. So what happened to Crazy Head was, I don't think they made the sales that EMI wanted them to, and they were dropped, which was a shame because I reckon they could have been quite big, to be honest. They did keep going for a while until 91. They are still playing. A lot of these bands have got back together and are playing again. So in 91 they came back with Some Kind of Fever, which was a decent album. I saw them on this tour on Black Records, but the magic had gone, to be honest. There's the name. And they just missed their chance. And the same could be said of the other band that came from Leicester. And the other band was Gay Bikers on Acid. So Gay Bikers, instead of the buzzcocky and punk of Poppies or the garage influenced thrash of Crazy Head, played a kind of psychedelic rock almost. It was the main feature of their music was the guitar, which was, it's almost as if the band were playing, the songs were written, singer was singing, and Mary, who later went on to front Apollo 440 for a bit and other stuff. So they were doing their thing, and then the guitarist would just basically solo all over the rest of the song. So basically there weren't some riffs, but basically it was, he had his wah-wah pedal and maybe a phase pedal as well, and he was just let loose, and it can get a bit much if you're not in the mood for it, but it sounds glorious when you're in the mood for it. So this is a one-sided 12-inch of their first couple of singles. So Everything's Groovy and Nosedive Karma on Bleed Records. I'm not sure, I think they released the original 7-inches or the original singles on Intape, I think. So groovy back cover. So yeah, they were more psychedelic. They looked different as well. They looked more like the Poppies would become. So lots of dreads, more hip-hoppy, more of a grungy look. So that's what they looked. And this album is their debut album. So this is Drill Your Own Hole, which is more of the same. They hadn't really changed their musical outlook at all from this, but sort of upped the production a bit, but not polished in any way. It was still really quite raw. So yeah, more influenced by psychedelic rock, more influenced by kind of a bluesy bass to it. So more sort of that late 60s, early 70s blues rock bass with a psychedelic wah-wahing all over the top of it with sort of an 80s indie sensibility, tying the whole thing together. So it's another great album. This album was named because because I remember seeing this and I didn't buy a copy of it, but early copies were pressed without a hole in the middle, so you had to drill your own hole, hence the name of the album. So it came with this original insert, so you've got pictures accompanying some of the songs. What's that? Competition voucher number 1. So they had a video out, which I didn't get. So they hung out with a group of junk artists called the Mutoid Waste Company. And I think if you go and find some of their videos from somewhere, you'll see sort of the sculptures that the Mutoid Waste Company made. Sort of that post-apocalyptic Mad Max look that they adopted. So yeah, the bikers kind of probably more likely to make it ahead of Poppy's, but behind Crazy Head. Again, they had a Radio 1 session put out on a 12-inch Janice Long session, which is more of the same sort of stuff. But by the time the second album came out, they were on Virgin. So this is their second album, It's Due to the Gills, which is less of the psychedelic. It's still pretty similar in vein, but it's got less of the guitar all the way over the top. This didn't sell at all, dropped by Virgin. They ended up making a couple of records under the moniker Rectum, in which they pretended to be an East German thrash band, and the Purple Fluid Exchange, where they became more dancey, more like Pop Will Eat Itself became. So they ended up being dropped. So they didn't make it either. And the final artist that I'm going to mention in this roundup of early Grebo bands, the first wave, if you like, was a guy who came from London. And I think he just got lumped in with the rest of them because I think the lazy music press were just talking about a load of bands who copped a load of stuff from early 70s rock and were basically playing the guitars amped up to 10. So that guy was Mark Manning, and he is better known as Zodiac Mind Warp. Now this Zodiac Mind Warp took the rock image to the ultimate degree. He wanted to become a rock god, and in the I think this was 86 actually, maybe 86. So in 86 they released their first single, which was Wild Child. Some more psychedelic artwork there. Great song, biker anthem in the making. Shame it never caught on because it's an out and out rock song. And then they released a mini album, and this is High Priest of Love, which they set out, again, their tongues had to be firmly in their cheeks. I mean, the lyrics, if you took them straight, they were absolutely outrageous. They were way more risque than anything Motley Crue came up with, and way funnier. But they were dressed in same sort of metal gear, a lot of German stuff. Also on Licensed Through Food. So we've got, I don't know, some kind of insert. Is that lyrics? Yeah. So we've got a lyric sheet. Hey baby, check it out. I got the juice to make you shout. You talk too much, button your lip, just take a trip behind my zip. So that basically, variations on that theme served his lyrics for the next couple of years. And in fact, longer than that. So yeah, so it was really short-lived, and there were only a handful of bands that could be considered Grebo to start with. Lots of guitars, just right up my alley. Loved the whole lot of it. And then, I think it was late 87. Maybe even 88. When was this released? Does it actually say? I don't know. Let's just check it. Yeah, late 87. The Poppies got themselves together and released their first album, which is this one, Box Frenzy. Now at this point, this is a bit of a game changer, this, because Poppies still had the guitars on some of the tracks, but they had been listening to Love Missile F-111, the Sigsy Sputnik original. They'd also been listening to Run DMC. They'd also been listening to, I think, the Beastie Boys. And if they hadn't been listening to the first album by the Justified Ancients and Moo Moo, then I would be a monkey's uncle. So there we go. And they incorporated a lot of hip hop into their music. And they were well ahead of the curve. So where their erstwhile companions in this Grebo scene kind of fell by the wayside to the Bikers and Crazy Head, Zodiac changed sound and sort of became more of a metal band. They laid the groundwork for what would inspire and possibly lay the groundwork for a second wave of indie bands, much more indie, still pretty thrashy, some of them, that have retroactively been labelled Grebo, which I'll talk about in another video. So, but this is a great album. It's got Grebo Guru, which is a hip hop version. On a free EP I got with a magazine, I've actually got the original thrashy Grebo Guru, which is completely different. Things like There Is No Love Between Us Anymore, which has got samples galore. Loads of samples on this. They've got their hip hop version of Love and Missile. Much more varied sound especially compared to what they'd released 6 months previously. So it was kind of a sea change, and this laid the groundwork for what they would become, which was a brilliant indie dance band with a great attitude, to be honest. So there we go. Grebo. Lot of good musical memories out of that, and I love these records so much. Shame that it was such a small bunch of records, but as you'll see in my next video, it seemed to be something in the air in 87, and there were an awful lot of bands who started rocking out, and maybe this lot had something to do with that in the sea change in the prevailing attitudes towards rock. Anyway, so thank you for listening to me piffle on about a bunch of bands, apart from one probably not many people really remember that fondly. I know some people love the Poppies, still do, and rightly so. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Cheers everybody. Bye.